1. Intro, Insight Reversal. What if the criticism that hurts you most isn't about them, but about you? We spend so much energy blaming voices outside us, yet the real sting comes from within. If this idea challenges you, subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers, and let's explore it together. Because Stoicism doesn't silence criticism, it transforms how you hear it. 2. Modern struggle, real-life pain. It doesn't take a dramatic moment to feel judged. Sometimes it's just a short comment under your post, a look across the room, or a tone in someone's voice that lingers longer than it should. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but somehow, it does. You replay it later, not once, but over and over again, as if your mind is trying to solve something that can't be solved. At work, it might be subtle. A colleague questions your decision in a meeting. Not aggressively, not even unfairly, but it stays with you. Hours later, you're still thinking about what you should have said, how you should have responded, what they might now think of you. And without noticing, your focus shifts from doing your job to protecting your image. On social media, it's even more amplified. One comment can outweigh 100 compliments. A stranger, who knows nothing about your life, leaves a judgment, and suddenly it feels personal, not because of what they said, but because of how quickly your mind accepts it as something worth questioning. Even in close relationships, criticism can cut deeper than intended. A partner, a parent, a friend, they say something casually, maybe even with good intentions, but if it touches an old insecurity, it doesn't feel casual at all. It feels like confirmation of something you were already afraid might be true. And so the mind begins its cycle. It defends, it argues, it rewrites the moment, it imagines better versions of you, stronger, sharper, more composed. But none of those versions exist in that moment anymore. What remains is the tension between what happened and what you wish had happened. This is where many people get stuck, not in the criticism itself, but in the echo it creates, because the real struggle isn't what others say. It's how long it stays with you, and how deeply you let it define you. 3. Stoic reframe, the shift. The Stoics begin with a simple distinction. Not everything that reaches your ears deserves a place in your mind. What you hear is someone else's interpretation, shaped by their experiences, their fears, their preferences. It may contain a fragment of truth, or none at all, but it is never a complete picture of who you are. This is the shift. Criticism is not a verdict, it's a perspective. And a perspective, by nature, is limited. When someone judges you, they are not seeing you as you are. They are seeing you through the lens of what they value, what they notice, and what they expect. If they value speed, they may call you slow. If they value caution, they may call you reckless. The same action can produce opposite judgments depending on who is looking. That alone should tell you something. The judgment is not fixed, it's relative. So the Stoic response is not to immediately accept or reject criticism, but to examine it, calmly, without urgency, almost like a scientist observing data. You can ask, is there something useful here? Not, is this painful? Not, is this unfair? But, is there something I can learn? If the answer is yes, even partially, then the criticism becomes valuable. Not because it defines you, but because it informs you. It becomes a tool for refinement, not a label of identity. If the answer is no, then the Stoic approach is equally clear. You let it pass. Not with resistance, not with anger, but with indifference. Because holding on to something that isn't true doesn't make it more real. It only makes it heavier. This is where most people struggle. They treat every opinion as if it carries equal weight. But the Stoics understood. Weight is something you assign. You don't control what others say, but you do control what you keep. And when you begin to filter criticism this way, not emotionally, but deliberately, you start to notice something shift inside you. The same words that once disturbed you lose their power. Not because people change, but because your relationship to their words did. Criticism, then, is no longer something to fear. It becomes something to evaluate. And in that space, between hearing and reacting, you reclaim control. 4. Inner mechanism. Why it hurts. Criticism rarely hurts because of the words alone. It hurts because the words land somewhere sensitive. They touch an insecurity, a fear, or a hidden doubt that was already there long before anyone said anything. That is why two people can hear the same comment and respond in completely different ways. One shrugs it off, the other carries it for days. The difference is not the sentence. The difference is the wound it touches. The Stoics understood this with remarkable clarity. External events do not create your inner suffering by themselves. They trigger what is already unsettled within you. A harsh opinion can only shake you deeply if part of you is already leaning in that direction. If you secretly fear that you are not good enough, criticism feels like proof. If you depend on approval, judgment feels like rejection. If your identity is built on being admired, even a small insult can feel like a threat to your entire sense of self. This is where the ego enters the picture. Ego is not just arrogance. Often, it is attachment to an image. The image of being respected, competent, kind, intelligent, strong. And when criticism challenges that image, the mind rushes to defend it, not always out loud, but internally. You begin arguing in your head, justifying yourself, replaying the moment, building your case as if you are standing in a courtroom no one else can see. But beneath that defense is usually something softer and more vulnerable: fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being diminished, fear that the criticism may contain even a small piece of truth. That is why the pain can feel so immediate. The mind is not just reacting to someone else's opinion. It is reacting to the possibility that your self-image is less stable than you thought. And then there is memory. Old experiences shape new reactions. A present criticism can awaken a much older feeling: childhood embarrassment, past rejection, the memory of being dismissed, overlooked, or compared. The current moment becomes heavier because it is no longer just about now. It carries the emotional weight of then. So when criticism hurts, the Stoic question is not, how do I stop people from judging me? The deeper question is, what inside me is so dependent on their judgment? That is where freedom begins. Because once you see that the pain is not only outside you, you stop chasing control in the wrong place. The hurt, then, becomes information, not proof that others are powerful, but proof that something within you still needs understanding, grounding, and discipline. And that realization, though uncomfortable, is the beginning of real strength. 5. Stoic practice. What to do. Once you understand why criticism hurts, the next Stoic step is practical. What do you actually do when it happens? Not in theory, not later, when you've calmed down, but in the moment, when the comment lands, your chest tightens, and the mind wants to react immediately. First, pause. That pause is not weakness. It is power. Most people think strength means responding quickly, defending themselves, proving the other person wrong. But the Stoics saw something deeper. The first reaction is often the least reliable part of you. It comes from wounded pride, fear, or habit. A pause creates space between the event and your interpretation. And in that space, you regain choice. Second, separate the words from the judgment you add to them. Someone says, "You handled that poorly." Immediately, the mind translates it into something bigger. I'm incompetent. They don't respect me. I always fail. But those added meanings are not facts. They are mental extensions. The Stoic discipline is to return to what was actually said, no more, no less. Third, examine the criticism with honesty. Ask, is it true? Is any part of it true? Is there something useful in it, even if it was delivered badly? This is where emotional maturity matters. Wisdom does not require that criticism be kind in order for it to be useful. Sometimes truth arrives in an imperfect tone. Your task is not to admire the speaker. Your task is to identify whether there is something here that can refine you. If there is truth in it, take it without shame. Correction is not humiliation, it is training. The Stoic mindset says, better to improve than to protect an illusion. A person who cannot be corrected cannot truly grow. So if the criticism reveals impatience, carelessness, defensiveness, or inconsistency, accept the lesson and adjust your behavior. Quietly, without self-hatred. If there is no truth in it, let it go, not dramatically, not with bitterness, just let it pass through. Every opinion does not deserve residence in your mind. Some judgments are projections, misunderstandings, or noise. The Stoic does not carry unnecessary weight. You do not have to argue with every false idea someone has about you. Often, the most disciplined response is inner non-cooperation. Another important practice is to stop turning criticism into identity. A mistake is an event. A flaw is an area of work. Neither one is your entire self. When you fuse criticism with identity, you suffer more than necessary. Instead of saying, I am a failure, say, that was a weak moment. Instead of, they exposed me, say, they pointed to something I can examine. This small shift protects your dignity while keeping you teachable. And finally, return to what you control. You do not control tone, opinion, gossip, or unfair judgment. You control your response, your reflection, your standards, and your next action. That is where Stoicism becomes real, not in abstract wisdom, but in disciplined behavior after discomfort. The goal is not to become numb. The goal is to become steady, to hear criticism without collapsing under it, to learn without becoming smaller, to stay open without becoming fragile. That is practice, and over time, that practice becomes character. 6. Identity shift. Final lesson. The final Stoic lesson is not that criticism disappears. It is that your relationship to it changes. At the beginning, judgment feels personal. It feels like something done to you. You hear a harsh opinion, and your first instinct is to protect yourself, explain yourself, or silently carry the weight of it. But over time, Stoic practice creates a deeper shift. You stop seeing criticism as a threat to your identity. That is the real transformation. A weak mind says, their words define me. A growing mind says, their words may inform me, but they do not own me. And a Stoic mind says, I will examine what is useful, discard what is false, and remain steady either way. This is where freedom begins, not when the world becomes kinder, but when your inner world becomes stronger. You no longer need every room to approve of you. You no longer collapse every time someone misunderstands you. You no longer confuse being criticized with being broken. Instead, you become someone who can listen without losing yourself, someone who can learn without shame, someone who can stand in truth without being controlled by opinion. That is not emotional coldness. It is emotional maturity. And maybe that is the final lesson. Peace does not come from escaping judgment. It comes from no longer building your identity on it. If this reflection resonated with you, leave a comment, subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers, and continue the practice tomorrow.